We start again with an image of a barren Times Square in New York. Good evening once again. This was day 1162 of the Trump administration, leaving 222 days to go until our next presidential election. It's been 15 days now since the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a global pandemic. And tonight, our country, sad to say, leads the world, but in an awful way. We have now surpassed China. We now have the greatest number of confirmed coronavirus cases on Earth. The president today said the fact that we have passed China is a, quote, tribute to our testing. He wants to clear whole regions of the country still to get back out, get to work pretty quickly, he said today. He added, the process has to start pretty soon. Please note we are nowhere near the projected peak of this illness, and our trend line is heading straight up. The president blew through a ton of impressive sounding numbers of masks and gloves and ventilators on order and being shipped. Some of the numbers were the same as yesterday, none of them with any bearing seemingly on the desperation we are hearing and seeing from urban hospitals, especially as the death toll soars. Remember, please, we have no idea how many Americans have the virus. Of those tested, over 82,000 Americans have been infected. Over 1,100 have now died. There are now upwards of 500,000 cases around the globe. Today, on the day we learn more than 3 million people have filed for unemployment, the White House revealed its new plan to try to reopen our country while also trying to contain the pandemic. In a teleconference with the nation's governors, Trump said he's looking into easing up on social distancing and other mitigation efforts. He's also calling for splitting the U.S. into high, low, and medium risk areas, county by county, as a way to potentially allow some people to go back to work. The president and vice president talked about it during today's briefing.
We're going to be talking about dates. We're going to be talking with a lot of great professionals. But this is a country that was built on getting it done, and our people want to go back to work. We've got to start the process pretty soon. So we'll be talking to you a little bit more about that next week.
We'll be presenting this weekend, the president, a range of recommendations and additional guidance for going forward. The president's made it clear that, in his words, he wants to open the country up. But we're going to do that responsibly. And as the president told the governors today, we'll do that based on the data.
Now, the Trump administration's 15 days to slow the spread program comes to an end early next week. But remember, this virus doesn't obey a calendar. It doesn't recognize state or county lines. The White House coronavirus coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, says officials are concerned about the increasing number of cases around Detroit and Chicago. She sounded a note of caution about the president's plan.
These are dialogues that the federal government has to have with state and local governments, because state and local governments make those decisions. And that's what's been inspirational to me, of seeing how much the governors understand where they are in their epidemic and what they will need to do in the future. Part of this will be the need to have highly responsible behavior between counties. And I think the American people can understand that.
Mike Pence also announced 552,000 tests have been completed across our country. But a reminder, in a nation of 327 million people, that's roughly 0.17% of all Americans. Meanwhile, more is being uncovered about the government's initial response to this outbreak. Politico reporting the White House failed to follow the National Security Council's nearly 70-page playbook on fighting pandemics. ProPublica is reporting on internal emails that reveal confusion at the CDC, delaying efforts to stop the spread of this thing in the early months of this year. President Trump's own comments about readiness early on offered no few specifics.
We pretty much shut it down coming in from China. We can't have thousands of people coming in who may have this problem, the coronavirus. We're prepared and we're doing a great job with it, and it will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away. This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. I've always viewed it as very serious.
Well, tonight in an interview with Fox News, the president criticized governors who have criticized his administration's response to this outbreak.
And we have people like Governor Inslee. He should be doing more. He shouldn't be relying on the federal government. Governor Inslee, that's the state of Washington. He was a failed presidential candidate, and, you know, he's always complaining. And your governor of Michigan, I mean, she's not stepping up. I don't know if she knows what's going on, but all she does is sit there and blame the federal government. Some of these governors, you know, they take, and then they complain.
I want to play two moments from today for you. One in the White House briefing room, the other on Sean Hannity tonight. We'll talk about both on the other side.
To make the implication that when they need a hospital bed, it's not going to be there, or when they need that ventilator, it's not going to be there. We don't have an evidence of that right now.
New York is a bigger deal, but it's going to go also. But I have a feeling that a lot of the numbers that are being said in some areas are just bigger than they're going to be. I don't believe you need 40,000 or 30,000 ventilators.
So, Doctor, I need you to react. Doctor and a guy who happens to be the president of the United States expressing doubt about what we're reporting as reality right now and or how bad this may become.
Yeah, and Brian, sometimes it's hard to tell if the president forgets that he's not a doctor. So I do think that Dr. Birx is trying to be a diplomat. She's trying to actually, you know, do what she can. However, here are the facts. I've spent a lot of time talking to my former med school friends and colleagues who are in New York. They are desperate. They're turning regular hospital beds and makeshift spaces into ICU beds. So they are full. And beyond that, they themselves are getting infected and suffering from this. So 1 in 8 New Yorkers who has the disease is getting hospitalized. And many of those people need to be intubated immediately. So this is not a matter of, well, the data just doesn't tell us. Actually, the data is telling us that some aggressive measures have at least potentially slowed this down. But we're talking, Brian, about slowing this down with still a significant number of cases that need ventilators, hospital beds, and then, as you and I have spoken about before, staff to actually manage those patients. And that's where we're breaking at the seams in New York City.
As we always do around here, we ask, remember, please, our first responders, especially in New York City, the current epicenter of this virus. Tonight, the NYPD announced its first death by coronavirus. A gentleman named Dennis Dixon, a custodial assistant with the department for 14 years. NBC News reporting tonight 351 members of the NYPD have by now tested positive for coronavirus. About 1 in 10 New York City police officers homesick right now, over 10% of the fire department. Yesterday set a record for EMS calls in the city, way more than even 9/11. Today, the FDNY commissioner, Dan Nigro, said 170 of his members have tested positive for coronavirus. We are happy to have back with us again tonight Bill Bratton, former commissioner of the NYPD, veteran of the Boston Police Department, former chief of police in L.A., among our senior law enforcement analysts. Commissioner, how do you prioritize? You can't, as no one needs to remind you, you can't answer every call. If you send 2 police officers out on an apartment noise complaint, if the wrong person opens that door, if that person is infected, you're going to have 2 officers go down.
You may have more than 2, depending on the nature of the call. That the department right now, the good news is that 9/11 calls are down about 25% from what they were last year. But the makeup of those calls has changed dramatically. Many of them are for the assistance of ambulances, for example. So good news also is that crime, which had been increasing at a significant rate the first 2 months of this year, is also down fairly dramatically over the last several weeks. So the department is heading into uncharted waters. It's heading into paradigm of issues that it's never experienced all at the same time. Fortunately, the leadership team at the NYPD is experienced. They've been through quite a bit. Many of them have been through Sandy, the hurricane, many of them were through 9/11, so that there's experience there. The problem is going to be rapidly the decline in the number of officers available to handle the situations here in New York City.
Sam Stein, I just want to remind our viewers and you what two of the president's chief financial types said to try to calm the waters just as this coronavirus was starting to rage. We'll talk about it on the other side.
The virus is not going to sink the American economy.
I think it will help to accelerate the return of jobs to North America.
So, Sam, is it too early to say that we're looking at something closer to a reformation of the American economy when this is all cleared?
No, not at all. Not in the slightest. I mean, the bill that's about to be passed in the House has been described in varying forms as a stimulus bill. It's nothing like that. It's an economic replacement bill. The federal government is essentially swooping in and playing the role of employer for vast swaths of the country who are now finding themselves unemployed. How you get back to a more functioning, normal economy after that is unclear to me, and perhaps experts can look at it. But it's not just, restarting businesses that have been shuttered. It's also in convincing people who have legitimate public health concerns about re-entering the workforce too soon that they should, in fact, re-enter the workforce. It was weird to hear the president say that American workers want to get back to work. Yes, to a degree, they would like the paycheck and the comfort and the security that comes with it. But the people who I talk to on a day-to-day basis are petrified that getting back to work means submitting themselves to climates that could result in infection. So this is not a situation where you can easily see Easter, or even a month from now or 2 months from now, where we suddenly flip a switch and we go back to where we were. This is going to take drastic, almost, Herculean tasks at re-engineering the economy. And I don't even think we'll get back to a normal, even with those.